Okay. Why does it say Javier?
It's preemptive. Hello and welcome to the show. I'm Vila Bianca.
I'm Eric Murphy.
This is Skeptic Generation.
And we need to talk.
Oh look, Skeptic Generation is on. My notifications just went off. All right, we're turning that off. Hi everybody.
Hey.
Hi.
I missed you last week.
I was very much in the live chat debating
Yeah.
with the callers, even though nobody could see me or hear me.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
But you went camping last week. You got to get away and just relax. How was it?
It was really nice. It was really nice. It was needed. I'm going to be doing more of that. Probably not over Sundays as much, but for sure, I am one of the woodland people.
Is anyone surprised, really?
If you are, then you very much do not know me. I feel like the audio is a little weird today. It's like kind of tinny. If you want to take a look at that while I vamp for a second. All right, y'all.
Sure.
So a couple of cool announcements for this week. First of all, we are going to be doing Versus this week, this Thursday at 6 p.m. We are going to be having that happen. It's a free episode, so nobody who is a patron is going to be charged for it or anything. This is purely us doing this because we like it and you like it, and hopefully we'll have some fun. All of the proceeds from that, all of the super chats, go directly to our 2022 goal, which is to get a new editing rig and be able to afford a producer to come and help us out and do things like mess with the audio, which is still very weird. We do have some news on that front as well. I ran the numbers after we paid out all of our taxes for this year, which, oh boy. And we didn't touch any of the super chat donations that have come in so far. We are about a fourth of the way there. So 3 months, fourth of the way there. We're looking at end of year being when we can hit that goal and actually jumpstart this new iteration of the show. So hopefully what will happen is end of next year, we'll close out, be able to reset over the new year, and then come back bigger and better than ever.
Yeah.
With some additional help and
Oh, that'll be
all of that.
nice. It is definitely nice when all you need to do is focus on hosting. You
Yes.
know? But yeah, quarter of the way there and about a quarter of the way through the year. So we're doing all right.
Yeah, thank you everybody, and please remember that this is all what I'm totally out of it today.
No worries.
I'm so out of it, and this audio is just messing with my head.
It's as good as normal.
Okay.
I don't know what to tell you. But what V is trying to say is that when we're hosting, we're also producing. So while whenever V's in this chair, V's hosting, and I actually have the entire setup for production. So moving over to the host cam, which also has Javier in Florida. I don't understand that
What
at
is
all.
happening?
I don't know.
You didn't, maybe you didn't clear the layer.
And then you have the co-host cam. No, it's just there.
That's very weird. We're going to have to
Yeah.
look at that.
Yeah.
See, this is why we desperately need some help.
Yeah. And then back to us. All of those things though are managed by the person sitting in this chair, and so we're wearing multiple hats while we're streaming.
Yeah. If you are interested in talking to us in this frazzled state, please do call in. You can call in using your phone.
585-526-8774. That's 585-LaMurph. Or you can go to tiny.cc/callSG. If you're watching on YouTube, which you have to be at this point, up in the banner, there's a link. It says call the show. And also in the description for this video, there's a call the show link. So you can call in and talk to us online. And honestly, if you do it through the computer, the quality is usually better too. So if you can, that'll be awesome.
Yeah. They're saying my audio is peaking. All right, so as we figure that out, we are going to start taking callers. Let's talk to David in North Carolina.
Versus.
I already said that.
You already did while I was doing the audio?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry.
Okay. David in North Carolina. We are very much in sync today. David, you wanted to respond to our challenge from a couple weeks ago.
Hey, Eric. Hey, V. How you doing? Challenge might be overstating it. The last time we spoke, you'd asked me, well, what do you believe? And can you talk about what you believe or and
right, yeah.
I was a little unprepared too. But and also there was the notion of like, why am I trying to connect? Why am I calling, or why am I connecting with this community?
Yeah.
And well, because I'm an atheist, and I've had religion and mysticism play large parts in my life, but they are, though very populous, just well outside of the realm of what I think that you and Eric, or you and V, have had experience with, and I think outside of the realm of a lot of the audience. But it occurred to me that why would you be interested in talking about abstracts? If I'm not emotionally if I'm not emotionally present in the conversation, if I'm not putting myself and my own experiences forth.
Right, yeah, exactly. What we want on this show is to get to know you, get to know the callers and what you think. So while I could go on and on with you all day about like the coolest books we've been reading or these cool concepts that we've found new ways to phrase, I do want to know about David and know what you think and how I can interact with that. So let's dive in. You said you've had experiences that you think are probably outside of the realm of what most people listening to this show and us on this end have experienced. Give us an example.
I hope that wasn't being misleading there. Well, one example is that both my parents, they split up when I was 3 and they divorced, and they're two wonderful contrasts. But my parents were mystics, devotees of a transcendental meditation guru in Sant Mat, and let's see. My father continued to be through his life. My mother, I'm just giving a kind of an overview because I can't get into detail too long on one without. So my mother was a teacher, an educator. She got her PhD in educational management. She also she did a dissertation on creative involving the study of creative self-actualization. In some ways, you might say it was to support art education, but she included a lot of religious experience studies in the dissertation, and it was connected with a movement of studies promoting meditation as part of education.
Okay.
But also, my mother was a trance medium as a private enterprise. Well, private enterprise, that makes it sound like it was a business. As a private endeavor, she was a rationalist and a humanist.
Part of the education that they taught kids.
Okay.
Right. Well, and also when I was 5, she gave me the Miracle on 34th Street speech about how Santa Claus and magical creatures live in the minds and hearts of people.
Mm-hmm. So I have a question for you.
Shoot.
Well, actually, I just kind of want to zero in just a little bit. So when you're talking about mysticism, and because last time when you called, that was kind of the heart of the conversation was the role of mysticism, right?
Well, I've tried to approach the topic several times, but I've never. I always dodge out into some talking about some book or psychology or.
No worries. I think there are a couple of really core things though that I think I regret not hitting as hard as I should have last call. And I think that we'll probably agree on most of them, so I just want to make sure that we get it out of the way. If something is useful, does that mean that it is true or more likely true?
No, but there are areas in which, areas of experience in which our informed view, or I'm not a person that can sense spirits or channel spirits or perceive spirits. I'm also not susceptible to self-hypnosis in my psych courses, and I'm somewhat too uptight for it, I think. But either you have to concede that hallucination and schizoid activity is such a prevalent part of the human experience, and that anybody is susceptible to hallucinogens from things like being in the open ocean, from things that you wouldn't expect to be to have high hallucination rates, high rates of triggering hallucinations. That a lot of what I cling to as I like physics, but a lot of what I cling to as objectively true. In lived experience, it doesn't necessarily seem so black and white and absolute.
Well, so there are a couple of pieces there. You kind of touched on a couple of things, and I really don't know which one to pick up from. V, did you have one that you wanted to dive in on?
I feel like we're kind of bouncing around what we maybe need to be talking about, which is, I think we're all going to agree that just because something is useful doesn't make it objectively true. But I know for me, I've encountered people of all persuasions as in terms of does that mean then that we should reject said useful thing? And how do we balance, all right, what is the use of this? What is the truth of this? Does one always and forever supersede the other? And David, it sounds like you might be saying that you're aware that there are things that are objectively true and things that are not, but you're also finding use in things that might not be objectively true and are kind of wondering how to parse that with a skeptical mindset?
No. I am
cool.
not a mystic. My father engaged in what is ultimately grounded mindfulness meditation, that all it does is elevate your current sensibilities up Maslow's pyramid in a very temporary, or rather contingent way, and that can seem very magical.
Wow.
And it can make you can use that instead of building ego support structures, and instead of building habitual reward systems.
I mean,
but
no,
it's going to be like an addiction.
I
just keep yourself running day to day. Keep meditating.
Well, but also they are not like that's a Band-Aid. I mean, if you want to look lower on Maslow's hierarchy of needs, food security, the feeling of safety, the feeling of support, and actually being supported. Those things are things that we are able to take steps towards self-actualization on, because we can depend on them, because that's not something that we're worried about is going to be an issue tomorrow. And so
I agree with the skepticism on it, but it's not as, for people, for example, Sam Harris, he is a nonstop meditator. He has a very balanced articulation of it, but
what is that? But what? I'm not poo-pooing meditation, but I'm also not going to say that is going to ever supersede the actual pieces that are laid out in that hierarchy, because I agree with that hierarchy. And I think that...
Oh, me too. What I'm saying is it's an ever-tempting thing for them to be able to forego, to be able to have a higher mindset than your current circumstances would. And this temptation... Have you ever heard of meditation psychosis?
David, hold on just a second. So we're kind of getting a little all over the place. I want to make sure that we're in the same direction, because the goal of this show is to talk about, people's beliefs, specifically when it comes to things like mysticism, spirituality, stuff like that. And there are a couple of things that you said. One of them is that you would have to grant that, different kinds of psychosis would have to happen way more regularly than we know. I'm not saying I'd have to grant that. That's something I learned in Psych 101. It's been reinforced
it's not really. It's a common thing that we
David,
like to ignore on the social level, but it's not.
I agree.
Really a debatable.
I agree.
You know.
Okay.
So where we're going here is, do you have a belief that is relevant to the show? Something about, skepticism, or some place that you don't think skepticism fits in that you want to talk about?
So you mean, am I an opponent, or am I talking about my relationship with the religion I was raised with, and me being an atheist and a skeptic, but also that never came into conflict in any way with. Well, I can say in any way. I've just been describing the ways. My anxieties about using meditation like a vice.
I mean, that's just fine. Opponent is a weird word to use here, but if, when we ended that last call, I thought that we had things that we disagreed on that would be interesting for listeners to interact with along with us while we had this. But if that's not the case,
well,
I'm glad you're
if you will come along with me, I can describe how it's not really discernible if meditation, by the person experiencing it, if meditation is letting you influence your own karma mystically, drawing whatever you want, whatever you need to you, or if they can, it's not easy to recognize that. No, it's reshaping your desires to
David,
maturely fit your circumstances.
Yeah, those are things we talk about. But I also don't want to encourage people to call in specifically about that kind of thing when we're usually the ones taking that position, and we want to make sure that we're engaging with people that we disagree with or who might think we're wrong. That way we can have that dialogue and show what that dialogue looks like. Otherwise we'll get a bunch of people calling in that says, I want to give you my hot take about X, Y, or Z, or talk about my beliefs, when we want to make sure that it's useful here.
So in my growing up ethnographic studies, I like to keep up with ethnographers.
David,
yeah?
Sorry. We are going to need to move on. I think I clearly I was on the wrong track in terms of where you were coming from, and I don't think we have a good enough idea of what you want to actually talk about, that core, to be able to get to that and talk about that in an impactful way in the next 2 minutes. So,
well, I thought this was a discussion show, not a debunking show.
Well, I mean, not necessarily. We want to have a discussion, and we want to be able to engage.
You guys will talk for a long time with other callers who are saying that they're having first-person experiences with pagan gods.
David, we're going to drop you now. Have a good day.
Oh.
Look, you guys, I may not be totally with it today, and for that I apologize if Eric has to take a little bit heavier of a role here. But look, we want to know what you believe, right? We want to get to the crux of it, get to the meat of it. And some people are really have these conversations with us and agree with us on most things, and then we want to dive in and find where we might disagree. Mm-hmm. If we find that we can't get there, if we can't find an in that conversation, then we are going to move on to other callers. That's nothing against you. I'm sure that you are all wonderful people.
Yeah, but and to be honest, that topic itself is something that I would have with somebody over beers at a bar for many hours, because I think we could really, really have fun talking about and learning about things like that. I just don't think that it fits the format of this show. Also,
don't tell us how to run our show. Just don't. No.
Yeah.
That's a good way to get dropped, frankly.
Yeah.
Let's move on. I know that the screen wants us to talk to Javier, apparently, so let's do that. Let's listen to a Wirecast. And
I figured out what was wrong, by the way.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
Good.
I had an early version of the show loaded up on the deck.
Well, that would make sense.
Now it's fine.
Good. Okay.
Hopefully.
We fixed it, we think. Javier, welcome. You want to talk about religious charities and holding services hostage, for lack of a better term, to those who might, engage with your religion?
Hey, Javier.
Hello. First thing I'm going to have to say is I'm sorry. I got to apologize. It seems that my voice is infecting your technology, and it's making my name be displayed. I don't know how to make it stop doing that. I'm sorry.
Yes, this is all your fault. Yeah, give us your best shot. What have you got for us today?
All right. So using the charities, that was more of an example of the greater point, because when I was trying to describe the point of the call screener, my linguistic skills failed me. It's kind of but to build off of that example in particular, as I've heard many people say, I don't know if any of you have ever stated this on any of the shows before, but it was the example of a charity, holding a sandwich hostage from a homeless person until they hear a sermon or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so that, like I said, is just an example for the greater point. And the greater point is, I would like to know what you guys think about how a religious person, the exact religion isn't really relevant, but a religious person may engage in an action that to others, I mean, myself included, may seem unjustified or, I guess, suboptimal, because they think that their religious cause is of greater importance. For example, oh, sure, you can have this sandwich, but you got to listen to the sermon first, because the sermon's going to save your soul. The sandwich is just food, but the sermon is spiritual food,
Yeah, no, exactly. That's a really good question. I actually did an episode with student Dr. Ben on ADHD. We read through an article that a Christian organization had put out about the kind of medications that are needed to treat ADHD and similar conditions, and what they thought about it as Christians. And it's very insidious, because what they end up doing is saying, we're not doctors. We will never ever say, do this or don't do that medically, because we can't, because we're not doctors, right? Listen to your doctor. Which sounds great until the next line is, but if you're worried about your soul and eternity, here's what you should be doing, and we can speak for God, right? And that's always going to supersede what your doctor says if you're a Christian. And so essentially what they're doing is making it seem like there's that distinction, but in actuality, they are trying to supersede it, exactly like what you said, Javier. And that can cause a lot of harm. Frankly, I don't care what you believe if you are somebody out there doing good things for other people. If you are helping your community, if you are standing up for those who are oppressed, we can have the conversation about what you believe and why, but that's not going to determine my perspective on you, right? It's going to be, how are you impacting those around you? Mm-hmm. The problem becomes, as you said, when a lot of religious organizations, not just Christian, but in this case, we'll talk about that, uses their ability to impact change as a way to get that second agenda in through the door, in a way that impacts how effective they are in the first place.
Yeah. One thing that that comes to mind is the idea of, maybe funding homeless shelters, or funding, orphanages or something like that. But if you're only funding orphanages that require those children to regularly attend religious services and pray, right, then the impact of that is that it really appears that the charity is second to the proselytization. Can you help me? Proselytization.
I think you got it the first time.
I think
good.
So.
You're good. No, exactly. It's prioritizing a group that agrees with you, right? In the same way that a lot of religiously run and Catholic, specifically hospitals in the U.S., do a lot of good. They absolutely do. I'm not going to deny that. But when it becomes an issue where I'm going to invoke my religious privilege as somebody working in this Catholic hospital to deny you care because I disagree with a choice that you made, that then becomes an unsafe place, and a place that only benefits a subgroup, which is, not fair or good, especially if, the group that's being benefited is also the one in power and holding all of the social capital. Yeah. But that's a lot. Javier, what are your thoughts?
My thoughts are that I agree with most of what you said. I do think that For example, I myself don't even touch a drop of alcohol, but I've heard that the 12-step program, for instance, has religious. It is a religious-based program. Like I believe realizing that you need a power greater than yourself to beat your addiction is one of the steps. And although, like I said, because I personally don't drink, I don't know the rates of effectiveness of this program. I would imagine that a program whose focus is first, foremost, and only to get people sober would be more effective than one whose purpose is to, get people sober and also make them Christians.
Well, so that's kind of an interesting one, because I don't know if that's really the order that it's in. I think that the effect or the impact that most people give it is sobriety, and an offshoot of that, what can come from that is a religiosity, and not necessarily Christian religiosity, but just a religiosity period. But really, I would say that the danger there isn't that specifically. It's that you're essentially teaching people that they cannot help themselves.
Right.
That you are too weak to get through, becoming sober. And I think that when you teach people that they're helpless, or you convince people that they're just unable to do something like that, I feel like it's damaging in the long run. And don't get me wrong, there are lots of Christian groups that incorporate AA, and I'm sure that there are plenty of AA chapters that are, push people into churches, but I don't know if it
uses the idea of a higher power as a necessity to build off of. And so if you don't believe in a higher power, you are encouraged to do so, or else it won't work for you, or it just doesn't work as well. And it doesn't work well. The stats on it are actually horrible in terms of how many people are able to actually maintain their abstinence. But yeah, Javier, I think that's I'm just so curious, because the way that you talk about these things with us, we agree on most things, and the reason that we find it interesting to talk to you is because you are a theist. And for me, I'm super curious as to how your own beliefs kind of wrap into this. Like, as you're talking to us, are there things that are kind of making more sense, making less sense? Like, how are you interpreting these conversations? Because I know that we find them interesting, but also we're curious about
where the difference is.
Yeah.
Well, could you be a little more specific? Because I don't want to go on to something unnecessarily broad. Could you be more specific?
Sure. As you're coming up with these questions, are these things that are impacting your belief system, or are these things that you're just curious about?
I guess you could say I'm an animal driven by curiosity primarily.
Okay.
In terms of things that impact my belief system, and like I've stated before, I guess you could say I'm currently in a period of evaluating my belief system. I still plant my flag on theist ground in particular at the moment.
Sure.
But I guess I'm in a period of great, questioning and evaluation. And part of that is driven by I guess you could say, I've also said this before, my understanding of that I have to deal with the world as it is, and what I may believe about it but cannot necessarily demonstrate is sort of secondary.
So are there still places where what you believe about it but can't demonstrate coming into conflict with the world that you find yourself in?
Well, yes, I would say. For example, I cannot demonstrate that there was any sort of. I can't demonstrate that there was a need or a God to create the cosmos, for instance, even though that's something that I can believe. And not attributing this to. Actually, you know what? I will say the Christian God, because what's the point in saying I'm a Christian if I'm not willing to, say that? But
fair.
And before all the apologists try to defend a God without saying it's the Christian God. But anyway,
thank you for the honesty. By the way, that is refreshing.
Yeah. but yeah, with that particular example, my thing is sufficiency is satisfied, but necessity is not. Clearly, if there was like a sufficiently powerful God, they could create the cosmos, but I don't see how that's necessarily necessary, because I can't exactly observe the creation of a cosmos if such a thing is even a rational concept. So
yeah, and
I guess that.
And if you were to take several of those events, right? Let's say we hypothetically were looking at 5 different creation of cosmoses. We couldn't be like, this has the markings of creation by a divine entity, and this has the markings of a naturalistic instantiation of a universe. And because we just can't compare them, there's no way that anyone can look at it and go, oh yeah, no, definitely, it's got God's fingerprints all over it. Like it doesn't.
Unfortunately, as humans, we are kind of limited to comparison, right? That's how we decide on just about everything. Does this thing happen in the same way that the others do? Let's compare. And if we only have one universe, then we can't compare it to anything. So we're either going to have to come up with a new way of knowing things, which a lot of Christians advocate for, like Reformed epistemology, or we're going to have to say we don't know. But I do love the distinction between sufficient and necessary, Javier. I think, honestly, I would love to have a full conversation about that.
Oh yeah, ontology is just fantastic. That's something V and I have fun with. Javier, question for you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so let's just, for the sake of this argument, grant that we live in a universe that was created by some creator, right? Let's live in that for just a second. Imagine a scenario where a creator created the universe, and in doing so expended themselves and have just poofed, right? They blew themselves up in creating the universe, versus a creator who didn't, and who listens to your prayers and it is the Christian God. Like, which one would be more likely, do you think?
Which one would be more likely?
The God that created the universe and then went out for a pack of smokes and never came home, or the Christian God?
My uncle. All right.
I like you more and more.
Thanks. I don't really know how I could evaluate the likelihood of that. I'm sorry if that's an unsatisfactory answer.
No, I would honestly give the same answer. I'm very curious about why we're using likely here.
Oh, sure, because what I'm doing is I'm looking at how many layers of assumption we need to make. How many?
Occam's razor, not like likelihood as in statistical likelihood.
Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah. I'm basically what I'm saying is, I think that if you were to just look at that, you still have a really long way to go until you get to Christianity. And because of that, I think that even if you did convince me that, there was some creator, some intelligent designer to the universe, how can we tell that they didn't just blow up when it happened, And so when you say that you're a Christian, I think that if I were in your shoes, I would need to look at that and go, well, crap, it's much more likely, right? There are far fewer assumptions in the blowing yourself up version of a God compared to the omniscient, omnipresent, omnipotent, omnibenevolent deity.
Let's also see if let's take a poll. Who thinks that we're getting demonetized because of the number of times Eric has said blowing yourself up?
No, we're good. We're good.
Oh, God. Javier, here's the deal. I think that we agree on most stuff, which is awesome. And I would love to talk more about this kind of thing and really get into the big questions that you might still be thinking about, because I can guarantee you, even if you're thinking about questions that we haven't thought of, I want to know those myself. Like that's curiosity for me. And if we have thought about the things that you're thinking right now and have found answers that are sufficient, or, haven't found answers, we want to be able to offer that too. So definitely call back, but call in about a belief that you're maybe still kind of looking under that microscope with. And I think that would be a really cool conversation to have.
I agree.
Alrighty then. I guess I'll think of a question for next week, and if I can, I'll call back in. Thanks for taking my call, and have a nice day.
You too, Javier. Thank you.
So, what that makes me think of? I'm not saying this is true of Javier, and I don't want to in any way trivialize it. Mm-hmm. But I feel like there's this kind of testing the water. Do I need to make any huge changes? If I'm in a place where I don't believe like I used to, what does not believing look like? What about all of these other things that are kind of a part of it? There are a lot of people who stay in their religious systems even after they stop believing, because they have all these assumptions that you have to do X, Y, and Z. You have to eat babies if you're going to be an atheist. And if you don't do that, then you're not an atheist. And so, how do you feel about these charities? How do you feel about these things? I feel like for a lot of people, and the reason that I find a lot of use in that last conversation is because there are people who are questioning, who are going, well, I'm not believing, but does that mean I need to make another commitment similar to the commitment I made when becoming a Christian if I'm going to say that I'm an atheist?
Yes, you need to come on this show and you need to say, Eric and V, I'm an atheist. And then you will be a true atheist.
No, oh God, no. But I find that is so, it's so nice to be able to actually have a platform for people to bounce that up against, so that they can go, oh crap, I don't need to, it's, I don't know, that's fun for me.
I can see the value in calling in as somebody who is questioning and asking the kinds of questions that Javier has been, which are, can I hold on to my moral system if I decide on these ontological questions, and maybe come to the conclusion that, the ones I had previously weren't accurate? Can I still be the good person that I might think that I am? And so the answer to that is yes.
And if that's not what's going on, we don't mean to trivialize it, but I think that those are the people who can get something out of this.
Yeah.
Specifically.
Let's talk to Ray in the UK.
Ray, I feel like it's been a few weeks.
Yeah. Ray, welcome to the show. You want to talk about how to find reliable sources of information?
Yeah, there was a study just recently published that made me think about this more. They had paid regular Fox News viewers to watch 1 to 7 hours of CNN per week for 25 days. And even though they didn't actually stop watching Fox, it reduced the number of hours, but they were still watching it. Even that small amount actually significantly shifted their views on the top stories that month. Mm-hmm. And the outlets I've seen, which are like independent news media, online stuff, who talk about this, they're really excited about it, obviously, because it's really good news. You can see it as really good news that people's minds can be changed, even if, like, they chose people who are very, very staunch Fox News viewers. And but they also would, the conclusion that people seem to be drawing is, well, then it seems people just believe whatever you put in front of them, so we just need to put the right information in front of them. But it doesn't really go into how do you make sure you've got the right information sources, because that's not what the study was about, really. Actually, the study was not really about what people are talking about it for. I have actually read it, and the whole paper, and that's a whole other thing that's kind of related to this, is how it was misrepresented slightly. But because of that, I'm now wondering, how do I know which are the best sources of information to choose? David Pakman tested Reuters and Associated Press, and I've heard other people who think, people will throw out all these very famous outlets and say, oh, this one's respectable, but no one ever says why. And I don't know how to find out, like, in detail, okay, who funds this organization? Like, you can find that out more easily. That's quite easy. But the stuff about what are their procedures, how many consultants and specialists do they have per subject, how much time do they dedicate per subject, what's their accountability and quality control procedure, how do you find out if they're doing this thing that a lot of news media is apparently doing now, where they just scour Twitter because it's easier, and they just repeat what everyone else is saying instead of checking.
Yeah.
You know, how do you know that stuff?
Ray, you know, I'm so excited about this because this is actually something that there is an expert on this call who can talk about this. Somebody who's actually gone to college for this shit. V, please, yes, this is it.
Oh my gosh.
I'm excited.
So, Ray, that's a really good and important question. And I can tell you just from what I've heard people saying to you from this conversation, they're all kind of not answering it correctly. Like, they're not answering you right. There's a phrase that I love, and it's truth is an aggregate thing. Okay, there is no one source that you are going to be able to read that will give you the truth. In fact, even if you were to read all of the reporting from all angles on an issue, you're going to get closer to the truth, but you might not even get it then. And that feels fatalistic, but what I want to impress upon you, I can give you a couple of actual, like, hard, things to actually do and, like, help with that. But first, I do want to make sure that I'm pointing out that there is no one place where the truth lives. There is no one source that knows things in a way that others don't, or is somehow not being infected by the same level of, you know, social media scouring and misinformation that everybody else is, right? So definitely take into account when people are like, oh, this organization, you know, does a lot of research and asks for peer review. Like, that's great. Definitely put that into your repertoire of things you're reading. But there is no one place to go for truth. And that's the sucky part. That's why being aware of what's happening in the world is so annoying, and why people on both sides of any political aisle prefer to just watch Fox News or just watch CNN, because it's a lot easier to get an idea of what's going on and, you know, trick yourself, I guess, into thinking that you've got the whole story instead of actually doing the really hard work of actually knowing what's going on across the board. So there's that, first of all. How does that strike you?
It makes sense, yeah. I don't like the idea of only having one source. And when it comes to, it's the current affairs and politics side of things that I feel out of my depth on. Mm-hmm. I do have stronger opinions on science reporting. My personal opinion on that is that I've never come across a single newspaper or TV show or anything that was accurate at reporting research papers. Yeah. They all get it horrendously wrong, sometimes innocently and not really importantly, and there are some really egregious examples I can remember from years ago that mean that now if I'm interested in what a paper actually said, I read the paper myself. Yeah. Otherwise, I dismiss the article. If I can't be bothered, then I just forget it, because I know there's such a good chance that it's actually misleading. And I don't know if that's something that people disagree with, because I'm not a professional scientist, so they might say I might misunderstand the study as well. I might do, but at least that's in my hands then, because the mistakes I see being made are really, sometimes they're so shocking that I wouldn't make that mistake reading the study.
Right. And it's not always a mistake either. Like, that's the other part of it, unfortunately, is a lot of the time, you know, it could just be that this science journalist who is hired and doesn't have a degree in, microbiology, reads a paper and misunderstands it and misreports it. But a lot of the time, what ends up happening is they commodify it, right? We live in a world where the news is a business that needs to run itself by making itself interesting. And so nobody is going to read a story on a paper that says, we looked at some stuff, here are some numbers, it's not super conclusive, but here's a new idea that maybe another scientist at some other point in time will look at, right? That's the majority of papers, right? There are hardly any that are just like groundbreaking, oh my gosh, out of left field, this thing just happened and now we have the answers to life, the universe, and everything, right? So that doesn't make good news. That doesn't make a good news story. It's not good entertainment. And so a lot of the time, the way that they spin it is to sell it as opposed to report on it correctly. So I love the fact that you are reading the studies yourself. And I love the fact that you are thinking about, how am I synthesizing this? What am I understanding? What do I need background information on? One really good thing that you might want to do, and obviously this is only going to work if you have a area you are focusing on. We don't want to have you blow up all the time. But having Google alerts for certain words or phrases will help get those in front of you every day. So I was listening to an episode of Ologies by Ali Ward, shout out, and they were talking about ADHD and the studies that are happening on ADHD currently. There are about 45 papers a day that get pushed onto the internet from reputable scientists, from think tanks, from, organizations that are credible. And the only way you're going to find out about those studies is if you have that alert set. So if somebody publishes something about ADHD, you're going to get that alert on your phone, on your computer. It's super useful. I do it for a couple of things, just the things I want to keep an eye on. And that's going to make sure that you're getting the most up-to-date information and all of it all at once, instead of only the things that journalists think are useful to report on, right? Because a lot of the times, of those 45 studies that happen every day, they might pick up one if it was interesting or relevant to another subject or seemed particularly inflammatory, but one of those other 44 might come at it from a different angle or, address an issue that the study that they chose didn't even think about. And so that's why I'm saying there is no one area to go to for truth.
Okay, so let's put this in practice, right?
Yeah.
Let's say I find an article on Reddit that says that eating dark chocolate prevents Alzheimer's. Mm-hmm. And it looks like it's an article from a major, maybe a Washington Post, okay, or just, I don't know, maybe an unknown source, but I'm like, V, because I've done this before.
Yes.
V, here's an article. I don't know how much weight to put in what it's saying. What do you do? And what should people do?
That's a really good practical question, because we did this with one of the new vaccines that you had heard about, and you were like, there's this thing that's happening, and it sounds really weird and like out
too good
there.
To be true, though. Yeah, there was an article months back about an Omni vaccine that was going to take care of everything, and that'd be it. It's almost completely over, and it's never going to be a problem again. And I was like, V,
allegedly,
take a look at this.
Right, and so we were like, is this real? Is this a thing? So some things to keep in mind. Always, like you do, Ray, go to that initial source, read through that, see if what the results of that study actually are reflected well. And that's the first step, right? Not only understanding the study yourself, but then going back to that news source that you found it from and seeing, did they accurately talk about this? Maybe the headline was weird because editors get their hands on headlines just to sell things, and that's not a good indicator. But within the article itself, did they seem to understand this study? That's a good thing to know in case you want to go back to that source later for maybe the brief overview of what's going on. Then you have to look at who did the study, who published the study, what else they have done, like you said, Ray, where the money is coming from, how are they being funded, right? This was, I think, a Nature article initially or something. And we were like, all right, so let's dive in. Who's writing this? Who's researching this? And looking at those individuals' credentials, right? And we found that it seemed pretty legitimate. The person who wrote the article was a high-ranking person in the U.S. military who had been hired for years to write about military studies. So it was like, okay, her credentials seem to work well. Let's go to the scientists. Who are they? What else have they done? Is this their area of expertise? Did a little research there. Oh, these all are, people who talk about this kind of thing all the time and have done previous studies that are now coming into play. What are the other studies that are being linked, right? And it's this huge task.
They're not like self-styled scientists who graduated from upstairs university.
Or even people in other fields who graduated with whatever degrees they had and are jumping into maybe a field they haven't explored as much or don't have a lot of background in.
Like an engineer wanting to chime in on biology.
Yeah, or like a detective thinking that he's a biblical history scholar or something. So the downside, as you're finding, and as we're saying here, is it takes a lot of work to actually dive into something that most people will just read the headline, maybe the first paragraph of the article, right? And so you are expending a lot of energy and a lot of time into doing something that other people are not doing. The benefit of that is you are then allowing yourself to not fall for the kinds of sensationalism that a lot of the media companies use to sell their stories. And when somebody else does a story on a thing, you already have that background knowledge and you can bring that to the table to evaluate future claims. It progresses, it grows with you. But you also have to make sure you are either have the time for it at all or pick and choose and say, I want to be knowledgeable in these 2 or 3 areas, right? Maybe I really want to know more about COVID. Maybe I really want to know more about trans issues. Maybe I want to know more about like reproductive health care. Whatever those areas are, pick that, stick with it. You don't have to be an expert at everything, but just knowing how to find that information is so, so useful.
And I just kind of want to juxtapose that with an example of something that I think a lot of us have seen. Yeah. And that is about 20 years ago, then Dr. Andrew Wakefield published a study that linked vaccination with autism. That will get us demonetized.
Yay.
That it turns out that it was not rigorous. It was like a dozen people. There were people that were selected for, and it was systematically debunked later on, and that person wound up becoming disbarred, and it was an entire thing. But it has been linked to and referenced for the last 20 years as justification for some really, really crappy beliefs. And what they should have done is looked at the study, and if they would have seen that it was not rigorous and what else was there, actually connected with the study, there's a much higher chance that those people would not be as entrenched in those beliefs.
Yeah, and just doing enough research. If somebody was like, hey, I did research into Andrew Wakefield, that is going to have a leg up on everything moving forward. Because if anybody brings Wakefield into it as an expert, you can automatically be like, oh no. That's no.
This person doesn't know how to vet
You
their
don't
sources.
know how to do this, so I'm not listening to this, right? So it does, as I said, it builds on itself, and you start amassing this knowledge base that will help you more quickly and effectively determine what is true and what isn't. But it is going to take a lot of work. But it also sounds like you're kind of already doing that, and you're already kind of diving in and jumping into the background here.
I do with the science. That's some. Yeah, I just wondered if people agreed with me on that. It's everything apart from the science that I'm less sure because there isn't an equivalent of Google Scholar for politics and
right.
the law And well, maybe there is. Maybe you can help me with that. But I'm not aware of any place you can go and. Well, I suppose if I wanted to know what a specific bill said, I would go on the government website and find it. But I have much less patience for that. They're really long and boring to me, whereas science is interesting to me. So it would be nice to have a news organisation that I could at least think, this will do for when I can't look into everything. Science is more my thing.
That would
when it comes to other things, I want to be able to trust someone to distill the stuff for me a little bit.
Right.
But maybe it might be more realistic to at least recognize what the bias is. So if you're getting it from a source, just recognize that here's the bias that I know that this source presents when it comes to the way that they talk about these things, and make sure that that's applied that way. There was someone in the chat, V, who had a question, who added me for some stupid reason, but Demil MP says, you need to teach someone what a good study looks like. What does a good study look like, V? I
am not a scientist, so at that point, it does become up to, it becomes that's the only downside to this, is reading the studies for yourself can get a much better idea, but it's very difficult for a layperson to read a scientific study and be able to determine if this was sufficiently, done correctly or not. A couple of things to look out for, just off the top of my head, very basic. If the sample size of the study is small, anything under, I want to say probably 200, 300 people minimum, there's probably a lot of wiggle room for error there. It could very well be that they find some kind of correlation, some kind of trend, but it wouldn't be enough to make a claim about a general population, which is what a lot of them try to suggest. Another thing is look at when it was published. If this is an old study, a lot of dishonest people will link to studies that have since been debunked. You can see this a lot in things like Answers in Genesis. They will link to studies from the 70s and the 80s and be like, well, look at this impressive paper. It's okay.
That's the last time someone's agreed with us.
Right. Is there something else that has happened since the 80s in this field that will, shed more light on this topic?
My own government is doing that. It's so frustrating. My own government is doing that with the issue of post-viral chronic illnesses, specifically ME. But now with long COVID, they're trying to apply this horrendous fraudulent, it wasn't just mistaken, there's evidence of actual fraud in this study that the government paid for. The Work and Pensions Department, back then it was called that, paid for these scientists who were basically psychologists, who weren't even doctors, to do this study, where it was really dishonestly done, to suggest that all people with ME needed was exercise and cognitive behavioural therapy, completely ignoring all the evidence of blood clotting and stuff. It was called the PACE, P-A-C-E, trial. It's notorious. If you look it up, there's so much been written about it, and they're still trying to drag it out and rehabilitate it, and there's so much financial interest in it. The government basically doesn't want... Anyway, sorry, that's gone off on a bit of a tangent maybe, but that's just another example. You can't even trust your own government because they've got their own agendas in terms of which studies they look for. Right. They have hired scientists who have been shown to be dishonest just because those scientists say the fringe view that they want, specifically about illnesses. Because we have a national healthcare system and the Conservative Party hates it, they just want any excuse to take people's financial support away. So that's one of the reasons I got into looking at the science so much, is I wanted to know, like you say, ADHD, there's a whole shocking example about that, which was about 10 years ago, I remember. There were loads of headlines all copying each other. They didn't seem to have read the study themselves. It was everywhere. BBC, big news outlets everywhere had the headline, ADHD medication has no long-term effectiveness, along those lines. And what the study actually showed was that when you took teenagers off of their Ritalin they lost the benefits of the Ritalin they'd been on.
What?
It was basically,
oh my God.
basically the equivalent of saying we took some type 1 diabetics off their insulin, they all died, therefore insulin has no long-term effectiveness.
Yeah.
That's literally the logic that they applied. And Fox News in particular actually had an expert come and talk about it. But what they did was they took snippets of what he said, only showed a small amount, and allowed it to look like he was agreeing with them. And then he had to make a YouTube video to say, no, this is what I actually said. This is how the study's been misrepresented. And now here's how I've been misrepresented. It's just a shocking example of that, I think. But yeah, ADHD is often a victim of that because it can be sensationalized so easily. But it used to be this big scare thing of they're over diagnosing it, over medicating. That was the big story. So any study that came out had that bias in it.
Exactly. Which is why you don't want to only look for the papers that are being published. Even if they're getting it wrong, there's a reason they chose those specifically, right? They factor into some kind of larger social narrative, what's being talked about right now. And a lot of the time, the truth, for lack of a better term here, the interesting thing, the thing that's going to really make a difference, are the things that aren't actively being talked about because they are more complex or because they are not sensational in and of themselves, but they are another building block, perhaps a very important one in a much longer term study. So those are a couple of things. The last one I would say is to make sure you're not looking at, there are a lot of studies that talk about meta-analyses and self-reports. So people who are being surveyed for things, unless it's a very specific type of study where they're actively controlling for the bias within the reporting, it is going to always be questionable to make any kind of accurate assumption about a group based on their self-reported either experiences or worldviews or emotional state. All of that always needs to be taken with that grain of salt that this is people talking about themselves, and we are notoriously bad at actually understanding the truth about ourselves and what actually makes us tick. So those are the three for me.
I want to highlight that a little bit, and then I know we got to go.
We do need to wrap up.
When it comes to self-reporting, there are a lot of people who just don't know how to sample, and so there are universities that will do studies but not account for the fact that the people that they're getting involved are university students, which means that you're not getting an accurate reflection of a general population. You're only able to make inferences about the population that you are sampling from. Also, just remember that the higher number when it comes to sampling, the lower the margin of error. So if you have a very small sample size and you come to a conclusion, the margin of error can be huge, all the way up to it not being true. And so the higher you get when it comes to studying a population, the more data that you get, the more you can shrink that margin of error and be able to have more confidence in what the conclusion is, so long as it's being done appropriately.
Yeah.
But that said, we've been on this call for a while.
This is definitely an area I love talking about. I think that it's useful for this audience and for people in this sphere of YouTube to think about a lot, because we're all trigger happy with that retweet button. We all are. We all will be, we just proved that Christians are less smart than atheists. Retweet. Yeah, it's like, it's not gonna. Guys, stop.
I hop on Twitter and I got added by about 500 people, and it's just like, why are you adding me?
But we just always want to make sure that we're doing what Ray's doing and giving things that extra little bit of attention when we can, and understanding that there is no one source of truth. Ray, thank you so much for calling in. You got us on a wonderful tangent, and we're so happy you got to talk to you.
I was so happy to. Thank you.
Bye.
Somebody said, what does EN stand for? England.
I don't think it actually does stand for England.
Well, I'm the one who's typing it in. So today it stands for England.
Today it stands for England. Speaking of being accurate. All right. Let's talk with somebody else from the UK.
Okay.
Let's talk with Chaos.
Chaos!
Yay. All right, Chaos. You're wondering how to better communicate in atheist or theist spaces, it sounds like. That's something we could all get, some pointers on.
Chaos, I missed you.
It's been a hot minute, hasn't it? Yeah. I've tried to wait until my laptop's fixed to call back in, but that's not worked, so I'm on my phone again.
Okay. What's going on today?
So I've noticed recently a persistent frustration I've had with communicating specific things in a lot of atheist and skeptic spaces. Now, for viewers who haven't seen me interacting with you guys before, I am a theist, but I am also a skeptic, and I hold some atypical views for theists. Mm-hmm. And I have found that quite often this combination of things results in when I talk to a lot of atheists or skeptics and try and communicate my views to them for the purposes of a conversation, I really don't feel like either I'm not communicating enough to them or like they're not listening, because one of four things tends to get assumed: that I'm like an individual crazy person and that what I have to say is of no merit, that I'm part of some sort of cult, mm-hmm. and I'm a solitary practitioner, but I do have community, so I know it's neither of the first two, mm-hmm. that I'm a troll, which I'm not, or that I'm basically an atheist, which just feels ridiculous to say out loud given I'm a polytheist.
You're actually less of an atheist than Christians are. So, yeah, I think that there's... I'm fatalistic today. I don't know what to say. The problem is you're trying to communicate with atheists and theists in these spaces at all. I'm sorry. A lot of the problem is just that there is a black and white dichotomous view of atheism and theism. And by theism, most people, at least in the US and in the UK, mean Christianity, right? And or even a little bit more broadly, the Abrahamic religions, as opposed to things like paganism. And so it really becomes very confusing for people if you don't get fully into either of those boxes. They're like, I don't know what to do with you. So I doubt that it's you. I doubt it's you. I think that it's probably a combination of the formats in which we have these conversations. They're not conducive to long form, let's get to know each other kinds of conversations. They gravitate towards being hyperbolic or being stereotypical just because you can fit more into a tweet or a comment on Discord if you rely on stereotypes. And if you break those stereotypes, suddenly you are not able to communicate as well anymore. And the other side of it is just this weird amalgamation of atheist, meaning also secular humanist, meaning also skeptic, meaning also anti-theist, and all of these assumptions are kind of built into that label. So if you meet some of them, they're like, oh, then you must be in this box. And you're like, no, I'm a humanist and I'm a skeptic, but I'm not in that box. That then gets very confusing for people, things short circuit, and the nature of the conversation tends to get very reactive. That's my experience. Eric, what are your thoughts?
Okay, so Chaos, I'm trying to think about the kind of conversations that you would be coming out of, and I think that V, you hit the nail on the head on a couple of them, but when it comes to practical advice, I do have a couple of things. Number one, Chaos, if you get the opportunity, model the behavior that you want to see. If you talk to someone who, how do I describe this? In my experience, I've found that people who are unwilling to challenge their views assume that you are also unwilling to challenge your views. And so if you go, hey, this is challenging my views, let's talk about it, I'm interested, I'm open, or whatever that case is, modeling that can help either A, bring that out in your interlocutor, or B, help you funnel out the assholes that really are just there to talk at you and not talk with you. Unfortunately, most people, especially when they're really active in this segment of things when it comes to religiosity. People are most active when they're questioning, when they're really, really fired up, or when they've just left and they're pissed about it. And because of that, you have I think a disproportionate number of people who are not ready necessarily for those conversations, and definitely not ready to have it on a stage. So be patient. I think that if you were to talk to me years ago, before ever really getting into this, I was, to some degree, I still am a prick, but I was insufferable, and I'm still insufferable, but I was more insufferable.
Imagine that, you guys.
I know.
More fedora levels, you guys.
Awful.
Not even kidding.
Yeah, no, it's bad. It's bad. I still don't have the heart to throw that fedora away, but I know I'm never going to wear it.
Wait, you still have it?
It's sized to my head.
Can I wear it on the show?
No, please no. No.
I want to wear your fedora though.
No. You're not going to be my good boy on the freaking show. Chaos. Where I'm going with it is the context that V is providing and that I'm trying to help, I'm hoping will temper what you expect to get out of the conversation. And one of the tools that I think would help is modeling. And that is also true for non-believers who are watching this. Model. If you're not open to having your views challenged, if you're just wanting to shout someone down, you're not worth having a conversation with. And that's on you to fix before you're going to be able to have a good conversation with other people. Period.
Yeah. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think generally agree with both of you. I think that where some of this bugging me has come from is recently I've spent more time in deconstruction spaces than atheist spaces, whereas previously it was the other way around.
Same.
And I'm just noticing how much in deconstruction spaces people don't make these assumptions. And then when I go back into atheist spaces, it's like, whoa, you guys are making a ton of assumptions. Yep. Unlike before, it was just the default.
Well, I mean, but just imagine, like, the number of shows that have the conversations the way that we're having them, it's not a lot. And so if that's not being represented, then how are people going to know that it exists?
Yeah, but like here's the thing. There is a huge difference too between the deconstruction space and the atheist space, right? They might come to the same conclusion about a god, maybe, but they are completely different. If you are in the atheist space, not everybody, but a lot of people who are gravitating towards that space are, I need the security of a worldview. Sorry, everybody. And this is where I find that, even if my worldview is just not that worldview, right? Even if my entire kind of reason for being in this community is to express how much not that I am, that is a type of person. And if you bring something in that seems like that thing that I am not, I'm going to get very aggressive. It's almost like, allergies, right? This is dangerous. I'm going to attack this. It's like, no, this is just pecan pollen. Like, calm down.
Well, I mean, especially if you're raised in an environment that values sticking to what your beliefs are. Like if you came out of a religion where, hey, I never had a crisis of faith. I always stood strong in my faith. That's something that you got to deconstruct. And it is very, very hard, especially when it's a tool that you're so used to using that you don't recognize that you're still using it.
Right, exactly. And a lot of atheists have not done that. Whereas a lot of people, not everybody, again, in the deconstruction kind of arena, is still very much in that middle space and really likes to play in that gray area of maybe I'm not either, maybe I'm both, maybe I reject the question altogether and want to talk about this other thing instead. And it does lend itself to more nuance. The danger there, of course, becomes when does it become navel gazing and kind of like philosophical masturbation as opposed to actually getting out and doing something. So there's a balance there and both sides have an issue. But when it comes to having more nuanced conversations, the deconstruction space is so much better for that, unfortunately. And it's something that a lot of the atheists that I know and follow could benefit from, frankly.
Yeah.
And now that I have thoroughly dissed the atheist community.
Yeah. Not the atheist community, but I think it's important that we challenge our peers and that we challenge people who watch and we want people to get better. And if we're not going to call you out, like, you're just going to walk around an asshole still.
Well,
like,
here's the deal.
We want you to get better.
We wouldn't call you out if we didn't think that you had it in you to be better, right? We wouldn't just be beating on you. We think that you can do better.
We're
Chaos.
We're not angry. We're just disappointed.
I feel like this is a very parental situation we have found ourselves in. I know you can do better.
Right?
We're so disappointed in you.
God. See, insufferable. We're both insufferable.
It's the worst. It would be better with a fedora, though. At least I would look the part.
No!
I'm just saying.
No!
Do it, me.
Thank you. See, Chaos thinks I should. Chaos, last thoughts before we let you go.
My thoughts are that, like, what I kind of thought coming into this is something you guys have affirmed, but you have given me a couple of new points to think on, and that is appreciated as always.
Awesome. Well, thank you for calling in, as always.
Yeah, thank you.
Bye. Oh, my goodness. Leave it in the comments, you guys. And I'll put together a poll on this one as well, so you can yell at me there, too.
Well, I mean, where do you go with that, you know? And
and here's also the thing.
And if someone's going to be typing in, not all atheists, well, no shit, just the ones who are probably like...
If you feel triggered by that, maybe you are one of those atheists, even if it's not all of them. No, but here's the thing, too. I'm not talking about the philosophical position of atheism when I'm talking about this. When I'm saying that atheists in certain spaces have a worldview, I'm not saying that atheism philosophically is a worldview, because it's not, and I get that, and you are correct. But when certain people decide to make that, to adopt that as an identity and a worldview, and that's something I did and continue to do to an extent, it becomes one. You bring other stuff into it, but if that's the label you're smacking on it, that's what people are going to see.
Yeah, and it's something that people just do. It's part of human nature. You see the history of just that happening in atheist circles, right? You have Atheism Plus, you have the Bright Movement, you have the atheist community, which kind of feels like the non-denominational
atheism.
Atheism.
I love it. Okay, that's the name of the clip, by the way.
Is it non-denominational atheism?
I'm writing this down.
Yeah, my church, we called ourselves non-denominational. Everybody knew.
Us too.
Yeah.
We were Baptists, but we had McDonald's for communion, so that was our version of non-denominational.
We used crumbled up matzahs.
I prefer the breakfast sandwiches from McDonald's.
Yeah, I bet.
Yeah. All right. We have just a little bit of time left.
Yeah, one more call.
Do we want to take Thomas in Tennessee? I know Thomas had called in before. Wants to talk about an experience that he had at a psychic village regarding an exploding toilet. And frankly, that's fascinating to me.
Absolutely. For our other callers who are on the line, those are topics that deserve a little bit more time. So please do call back in. And in the meantime, yeah.
Thomas, welcome to the show. We are very excited to hear about this story, but it has to be fast.
Hey, Eric and V. Glad that you could have me on. So let me give you a little bit of backstory. I'll try to make this very quick. When I was quite a bit younger, I was married to one girl. We got 20 years out of our marriage, and then she decided that I wasn't worth it anymore, and she decided to divorce me. So we ended up getting divorced. I tried praying to God and got nothing in return, and I was so bad off that I said, if I don't do something for myself, I'm going to be stuck in this, and nothing's going to happen. And that's when I became an atheist, and that was about 12 years ago.
Okay.
Anyway, I got remarried. I'm very happy.
Okay.
I'm extremely happy. And things are going very well. But in that first marriage, one time we decided to take a summer vacation. We just decided it was just going to be a day thing, and we were going to hang around our area, which in this case is southwestern New York State.
Okay.
Which is, close to the Pennsylvania border. But there is a little hamlet, what they call a hamlet out there. It's kind of like a tiny village. it's very quaint and cute. It's a very cool place. A lot of people in the area go there just for fun to have psychic reading done because it's a spiritual place. So they have all these spiritualists. But my ex-wife and I went to one, and she had to charge choice amount because it was both of us, which I always found kind of funny. But and I think we were all holding hands, and she was making predictions about what would become. And she said, "I'm seeing water in walls," and neither of us could figure out what is she talking about, water in walls. That's the only thing I remember about the conversation.
Okay.
And the reason that is because when we got back from vacation, it was time to go to bed. It was nighttime, and we settled in. Mm-hmm. And my ex woke me up, and she said, "You're not going to believe this, but I'm hearing water in the wall."
Oh, no.
I'm like, "What?" So I put my ear up near it, and it was like, sure enough, that's water. And I went up to the second floor, and the toilet had exploded. I've never heard or seen that before, but I guess it can happen. I don't know how.
We've also experienced that. That sucks.
Yeah, the 2 a.m. bailing out your restroom. We had a couple months ago. Mm-hmm. It was truly awful. Shout out to Thomas and Hannah. We showed up at their door at 4 a.m, covered in waste. It was.
Can we sleep here?
Yeah.
All right. So your toilet
burst?
exploded. Yeah.
Oh boy.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I went down to the basement, and of course the basement's kind of flooded out. A couple inches on the ground there, but we just laughed because it was so odd. Now, I was, a believer back then, obviously, but we just found it a very odd experience. I mean, how do you think that she got that? Because water in walls is so non-specific. Like if she said, "I'm seeing electrical problems" or something, or even plumbing problems, but she said water in walls.
Well,
very funny.
I definitely have a take, but I don't want to dive in right away. Do you have anything? Or
you know what? To me, that just seems like a really, really cool, weird coincidence. Like for me, but also I would say, hey, if a toilet hadn't exploded and nothing had happened there, you could look back and be like, well, water in the walls could mean like a hidden problem that we didn't quite know about and was causing some damage that we didn't see at the time, and read that into maybe the situation with your ex or whatever. I think that as somebody who reads tarot, you can very easily find things and be like, oh, that definitely means that thing over there, or this could be literal, it could be metaphorical, it could be anything. Yeah. But it's super cool. That is something that's exciting to me.
Okay.
Yeah, what's your take?
It's funny. I mean, that's the way I look at it. It's, kind of something to look back and laugh about, because I don't believe that kind of stuff,
Yeah.
It's something that you did for fun.
But here's the thing, Thomas. I don't think you would have remembered it at all if it hadn't happened.
No?
No.
We wouldn't have remembered it if it hadn't happened in such a short period of time. Well, but I couldn't tell you one thing that she said other than that.
Well, and that's the thing. If she would have said something else that may have happened recently after, you would have remembered it. Mm-hmm. It's the way that our minds work. In fact, just looking at the way that psychics do readings, it is amazing the number of predictions that get thrown out there. It's just throwing, spaghetti at the wall to see what sticks. Mm-hmm. And then whatever sticks, that's what you look at and go, oh, hey, yeah, that's it. It's actually, there's a fallacy underneath it. And that's the Texas sharpshooter fallacy. Yep. Right? And so...
I'm about as, skeptical as any, as you can be.
But that's how our minds work.
Right.
That is how our minds work. It is not a you thing. It is just an understanding how human psychology works. That we count the misses, or we count the hits and we ignore the misses, and we forget that those misses even happened. There have been studies that have asked people, hey, how many predictions were thrown out there when you were at that psychic? And people usually only guess a fraction. They think, oh, well, there were 12 predictions, when in fact there were 200. And so I've got to say that, my first reaction to that would be, I believe you. And I think that it is a trick of human psychology. I don't think it's a coincidence. I think that if you throw enough crap at the wall, something's eventually going to stick. The one thing that sticks is the one thing you remember. And just like you said, you don't remember anything else from that. But I bet you if it was something else that happened, that would be the one thing that you remember.
It's funny that you would bring up that because I was telling the story to my current wife, and she says, no, she just got lucky, which I agree with her. She says, what you're doing is counting the hits and ignoring the misses. And then she says, and that's one thing you should never do is ignore the misses.
I like it. She's punny.
Somebody else threw that out in the live chat at the same time.
Oh, that's funny.
Yes.
Oh, my gosh. Well, thank you for calling in, Thomas, and sharing that story with us.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, of course.
We're both big fans of you.
Yay. Well, hello to both of you, and thank you for watching.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you so much. You guys have a fantastic afternoon.
You too. Bye.
So just if people don't know, can I present the Texas sharpshooter fallacy really quick?
Yes.
Yeah?
Sure. Then we need to read Super Chats.
Okay. So 2 people are driving down a country road, and they happen to see a barn, and the barn has all of these bullseyes drawn on there, and right in the center of the bullseye is a perfect arrow or a perfect bullet, hole. And they're just amazed that it is just dead center every single time. And so they go and they knock up on the door. They knock on the door and say, hey, I'm sorry to bother you, but we saw this from the road. There are all of these bullseyes that are just perfect on the barn. How did you come to become such a good shot? And the farmer says, I can show you. And so walks them out to the barn, takes out their rifle, shoots at the barn, walks up to the bullet hole, and then paints a bullseye around it and makes that the center of the target. And that's just what happens. Is the Texas sharpshooter fallacy, or just the sharpshooter fallacy. And it's something that we do. We will make the data fit the conclusion. And that's just something to be aware of. Also, though, on the topic of is it true versus is it useful, I bet you anything that farmer never has to worry about thieves. Nope, probably not. All right, let's dive into some super chats. All right, and they are up this time. Again, so sorry. Last week we lost almost all of our super chats. I saw that, but we've got them all this week. Yay! Viper Zhang sent $5 and says, you guys need a producer. Right at the beginning of the show with all the issues. Oh my gosh. Actually, speaking of, let me get Thomas's name down. Josiah1 sent $10 and says, what are your favorite and least favorite foods? Ooh. Excuse me. Favorite food is butter. Least favorite food is not butter. Let's see. I don't like black licorice or fake cheese. I love cheese, but if it's like fake neon cheese, I'm not a huge fan. Which means I get I get to buy snacks for myself because I like both of those things. Yeah, all the Cheetos and Cheez-Its I will never touch. Yeah. No. As far as favorite foods, most of them around this time of year, Cadbury cream eggs are just, I love them so much. I know it is a polarizing issue. So you either love them or hate them, but he opens it up and then goes at it with a spoon. I trusted you with that. I trusted you with that. Simply Haven. If I could go with a straw, I would. Simply Haven sent $50. Thank you. I will always be listening, no matter the audio, no matter the production, because I hear the incisive, kind, and well-directed reasoning and challenges to callers. This is the weekly breath of fresh air that I look forward to. Well, thank you. Simply Haven, I'm going to cry. Yay. Amit Matthew sent $10 and says, I have, quote, atheist or, quote, atheist Jane friends. People who value the traditional practices and culture behind their religions, but don't believe in gods. Do you think there's value in this stance? Absolutely. Mm-hmm. I think that's 100% a legitimate way of living your life. If you find a culture or a traditional practice that either you've inherited or works really well for you, as long as you haven't appropriated it, then do it. Like, that's awesome. Yeah. Just also
be skeptical about it.
Yeah, I regularly have said, and I will continue to say, every opportunity that I get to tell the people I love that I love them, or have an opportunity to have them together, to gather around the table, I want to take. And especially when it's cultural, that is yours. That is your cultural inheritance. And just because some people tie religiosity into it does not mean that it should ever be taken from you. It is yours, and you should celebrate it.
All right. Moldred sent $6, but the comment was deleted, so I have no idea what that might have been.
Do you want to do the next one?
Sure. B-Pick sent $5 and says, the Young Turks is the political news source I personally trust, but I still check the facts. The Young Turks definitely have certain takes that I very much agree with. There are other areas where they just aren't the most informed. And just as long as you are also informing yourself elsewhere, they seem like a fine group to pay attention to.
I mean, just recognize that they are very left. Like, if you don't think that they're viewing it through that
exactly.
lens,
They're not unbiased.
No, but you just need to recognize that bias and make sure that, if it is something specifically impacted by that you're taking the time to look up other things.
Frankly, the idea that there is anything that is unbiased is ridiculous and makes it impossible to find that one source. So if you want left-leaning, really incisive commentary on what's going on, check out the Young Turks.
Sure.
But understand that's what you're getting.
Also, people in the chat were saying David Pakman. They watch David Pakman.
Do you know that David Pakman is one of the top people that our audience also watches?
I did.
That made me very happy because David's cool.
Yeah. Viper Zhang sent another $5 and says there's a ton of studies that say 100% of water sources contain dihydrogen monoxide. I had a chemist sit me down and explain to me the minutia behind why that is not entirely true. I don't know what it is. I don't remember it. All I know is that I'm kind of uncomfortable about it.
Jara OT sent $2.99 and a cute little puppy sticker.
John Klein sent $5 and says, is this enough to see the fedora next week or no? No, it is not enough. Thank you, though. That will go towards our goal, our ongoing goal of getting a production computer, at which we are about a quarter of the way through. So thank you. Jar OT sent $10 and says, Sarah Howard here. Oh,
hey Sarah.
You said you had emceed McDonald's breakfast. I also have McDonald's on Sundays to celebrate leaving Mormonism because it was part of my transition out, and drink a nice frappe. Have some coffee on me.
Thank you, Sarah.
Let's do that. Let's get coffee after this.
I think that's a good idea. Sarah Dye sent $10 and says, we are back from Colorado at a month of roller coaster cancer treatment for my pup. Love you guys. Sarah, I hope your pup's doing better.
Yeah.
And I hope that you have fun just like relaxing at home now.
I'm glad you're here and glad you got home safe.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody. Let's convince Eric to let me wear his fedora, huh? Let's get in the comments. Let's get to the polls. Let's put the pressure on.
Not gonna happen.
All right. You think it's not gonna? It's so going to happen. All right, you guys. Thank you so much for sticking with us. We had a little bit of a rocky beginning, but
yeah, my bad. Sorry.
Until next time, we're glad we had this talk.